Well, the overarching message from today's story that we've read in our Bible and that I will read, we read in our Bible storybook, and I will read from the Bible. In this particular time of our shared history, this is what the Lord is saying to us from Judges. The overarching message: God calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And when we trust God, God's presence empowers us to succeed, and the result of partnering with God is peace. We'll follow up on that again a little later. So, how are you doing? We have been living into this altered reality for a little over 2 weeks now. Seems longer to me, although I'm losing track of time, and I've heard a lot of people saying they're not even sure what day of the week it is because our days are all more the same now than they were before. The main thing, I think, is to just keep working the program to stay safe and healthy. And we will get through this with a minimum of heartbreak. We're doing well in the Flach household, and we are praying that the same is true for all of you and your loved ones. One thing that has changed during this season for me is my exercise routine. Oh, I'm still exercising 5 or 6 days a week faithfully on my stationary bike out in the garage. But what's changed is that the DVDs I get from the library have dried up. See, I watch movies while I cycle, and that makes the 30 or 40 minutes less tedious. But the library's closed, so I still have my last 3 DVDs. I can't even return them, and I can't get any new ones. So I am limited to the DVDs we already own. And we have plenty of them to get me through this crisis. The crisis of no new DVDs is the crisis I mean. But I've already seen all our DVDs. So anyway, I'm watching the first 2 seasons of, get this, Perry Mason from the late 1950s. And those of you who are familiar with that, or even if you're not, you can guess, every episode has a courtroom scene with a judge in a black robe, rather like this one, except it's plain. They don't wear the nice stole. And these judges preside over the case and keep the peace between Perry Mason and District Attorney Hamilton Berger. Okay, that's fine. Why am I telling you this? Well, it's a roundabout way of leading into the current Bible book that we are reading through with our Bible stories. In the 365 readings, God's story, our story, we have entered the book of Judges. And before we read today's passage, I wanted to make sure that you didn't think that the people in the book of Judges were anything like the judges in Perry Mason or any other courtroom drama you care to name. I'll tell you what they were like in a minute. But first, where are we in the Bible plot? We've progressed through Moses and Joshua. They've started to conquer the promised land, but the book of Judges starts with the death of Joshua, and from that point on, there is no strong, centralized leadership for the Israelites. No Moses or Joshua types. And besides that, the tribes, of course, have all received their allotments of land, and so they are spread out all over the promised land. They're not physically together. That sounds familiar. And unfortunately, they have not thrown out all the pagan Canaanite tribes as God had told them to do, and they are beginning to intermingle with these unbelieving cultures and adopt their pagan ways, with the result that they are gradually forgetting about Yahweh, the true Creator God, with whom they are supposed to have a covenant relationship. That's our current sermon series, Covenant, How God Loves Us. In fact, this is the last installment of that series. But the Israelites are forgetting God and not even allowing Him to love them. And the book of Judges has two iconic phrases that help describe the attitude of the wayward Israelites at the time. And these phrases come up repeatedly in the book. They did evil in the sight of Yahweh. And secondly, everyone did whatever was right in his or her own mind or own eyes. They did evil in God's eyes, and everyone did whatever they felt like. And to me, actually, it sounds kind of like a lot of things I still hear in the news in our own day. Maybe human nature hasn't changed that much in 3,000 years. So in this evil, selfish, chaotic promised land divided into tribal regions with no strong national leader, regional strong men emerged. And not just strong men, also strong women too, as we read about just the last couple of days. Did you like those stories about Deborah and Jael? Ooh, that story with the tent peg, ouch! So these regional leaders sprang up to try to keep the order. That's what the judges in this book of the Bible are. They are people stepping into the leadership void to help keep order and also to point to the true God, Yahweh, during a time the Israelites were forgetting that fundamental relationship with God. And today's story tells us how God raised up one of those judges. His name was Gideon. And this was a man who did not feel up to the challenge of leadership. He was an unwilling hero. But by sticking with God, he was able to accomplish great things. So let's read the story of how God asked Gideon to be one of the regional strongmen, one of the judges. But before I read, I think it's important that we know that the word Lord that appears so often in this passage, that Lord has a name, and it is Yahweh, which has been strangely anglicized to Jehovah in many places. But this name Yahweh appears 16 times in the original Hebrew text, but not a single time in our English translation. Why is that? Well, for outdated reasons, translators avoid directly using the name of God, and they choose to say the Lord instead. But when I read in a moment, I will insert God's name Yahweh. And here's why. A big part of Israel's trouble in that time was that they were forgetting their covenant relationship with Yahweh and starting to worship other gods, pagan gods, with other names. So the biblical writers stressed the name of God Yahweh because it was the name that God himself had given to Moses at the burning bush. The Israelites were starting to call false gods Lord, as if Baal or Dagon or Ashtoreth were gods. But the judges, and later the prophets, and the writers of the Bible say, no, the one true God is Yahweh, and I agree. So I'm going strong today. I'm going to name God's name rather than just calling him the Lord. And it's going to be fine, and maybe it adds some flavor. So we are in Judges 6, starting at verse 11. Now, the angel of Yahweh came and sat under the oak at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. The angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, you mighty warrior. Gideon answered him, but sir, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, did not Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? But now Yahweh has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian." So Yahweh turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. I hereby commission you." Gideon responded, "But sir, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." Yahweh said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midianites, every one of them." Then Gideon said to him, "If now I have found favor with you, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay until you return." So Gideon went into his house and prepared a kid, a young goat, and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and he brought them to him under the oak and presented them. The angel of God, Elohim, God, said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened cakes, put them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh, reached out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of Yahweh vanished from his sight. Then Gideon perceived that it was the angel of Yahweh. And Gideon said, "Help me, Lord Yahweh, for I have seen the angel of Yahweh face to face." But Yahweh said to him, "Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to Yahweh and called it "Yahweh is Peace." To this day it still stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. God calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and when we trust God, God's presence empowers us to succeed. And the result of that partnership with God is peace. Can you see it in the story I just read? God calls ordinary Gideon to do extraordinary things. It's there in verses 14 and 15. Gideon is ordinary because he comes from the weakest family in his region, and he's considered the least in that weakest family. Verse 15. He's very ordinary, but God says he will use Gideon's own might, his strength, weak though it may be, to deliver Israel from the Midianites, who, by the way, we know from earlier in the chapter, have oppressed the Israelites for 7 years. And that will be an extraordinary accomplishment by Gideon. When we trust God, God's presence empowers us to succeed. Now, does Gideon trust God so that God can empower him? Well, sort of. Not really. At verse 13, Gideon says, "Well, I've heard all about you leading our ancestors out of Egypt, but what about now? Where have you been? They're oppressing us." And God simply responds at verse 14, "I commission you." And then at 16, he says, "And I will be with you." But Gideon doesn't believe that well. He wants proof. And in this case, Yahweh grants him proof. So Gideon's fragile faith is confirmed to the point that he suddenly realizes he's been face to face with the all-powerful, all-holy God, and Gideon thinks he's going to die. But God comforts him, tells him not to be afraid, and grants him peace. And in the assurance of God's presence and God's promise of peace, Gideon creates a place of worship called Yahweh is Peace, Jehovah Shalom. It's one of the names of God from the Old Testament at verse 24. God calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and when we trust God, God's presence empowers us to succeed. Do we know that Gideon succeeds? Well, not yet. But I invite you to read the next 2 or 3 chapters of Judges, and you'll see that Gideon does succeed. They're really interesting chapters with lots more cool stuff about Gideon. He fulfills his commission from God, and he delivers Israel from the Midianites. He's really transformed from the least important member of the weakest family around to the mighty warrior that Yahweh's messenger named him from the beginning of our passage today. And the result of that partnership with God is peace. Not only is Gideon at peace with Yahweh, Jehovah Shalom, but guess what? The whole nation of Israel also experiences peace, 40 years of peace. And Gideon lives in peace to a ripe old age. And you can read about all that in chapter 9. Friends, we are a church of ordinary people, too. Well, actually, I think many of you are pretty extraordinary, but you would never say that about yourselves. We are normal folks. We're ordinary people through whom God is also doing many extraordinary things. And that happens best when we also choose to trust God and to partner with Him. And we say that all the time. We partner with Christ as He transforms the world, one life at a time, trusting and partnering with Him by doing what we are called to do is perhaps more important at this time, during this health crisis, than it ever has been, or has been for a long time. And it's a crucial time for the church, not just Lake Grove, all churches, church with a capital C. How we behave during this crisis will be noticed. So, how are we doing, Lake Grove? Are we following in the footsteps of Bible heroes like Gideon, who chose to walk with God, who trusted God, who did hard things because God wanted him to? Well, actually, I think we are. How are we doing that? Well, first of all, you need to know that your leadership team is working hard and thinking hard about our current situation. And we are trying to communicate well. If anything, we want to over-communicate right now so that we can stay connected. And we're trying to figure out ways for us to connect even though we can't gather here at church, as we said, to be together even though we can't be together. And I'm thinking and hoping that many of you experienced this during the past week. You might have received a phone call because dozens of volunteers have been trying to contact everyone on our church roster to make sure that you are all okay, to find out who needs help, to learn who is connected online and who is not. And if electronic technology, emails, and websites are not your best mode of communication, we want to know that. We want to learn that so we can communicate in your language, maybe by phone, maybe with printed material through the mail service. So please, let us know. And we are hearing wonderful stories of how you are reaching out to one another and to your neighbors outside of the church, without prompting, just out of common human decency and love. Thanks be to God for that. And sorry, I don't know where to really fit this in today's worship, but I'm going to say it anyway. It needs to be said. Lake Grove is blessed with an abundance of professional people, including many in the medical profession. We've got lots of doctors, nurses, dentists, administrative help, and many of them are on the front lines right now, battling this disease, even putting themselves at risk. And I don't know who they all are, but I'll bet that most of us know at least one or maybe a few of them. And so, friends, let's pray for these folks. Let's send a note of encouragement. And in fact, this is an interactive sermon. Please join me right now in clapping out loud for these friends because they are blessed to be a blessing in a time such as this. By the way, your pastors are still available to you as usual. If you need to talk with a pastor or a care team member, just call the care number. I think it's listed on your screen right now, 503-210-6062, or email us at care@lakegrovepres.org. We are checking regularly, and you will get a response. That information is also found every week on our bulletin. If you have the access to the online bulletin, it's printed there for you. The church's ministries continue, if anything, at a heightened level during the pandemic. And not just within and for our own congregation. We have maintained contact with our mission partners too, here in our own area and far away around the globe. We have fielded their prayer requests. We have communicated with them. We're carrying on conversations of mutual support. Locally, we have partnered with the LO School District for families of kids not currently getting school meals. And there are other local needs, opportunities to help if you want to, and you can see those on our church website. Internationally, we have been in touch with our partners. We received a request from World Vision in Zambia to share our experiences coping with this virus because our curve is ahead of theirs. So some of us are participating by video in chapel service this Wednesday for the national staff in Lusaka, Zambia. So, how are we doing as a church? Well, with all due humility, I think we're doing pretty well so far, and I expect us to learn and to get better at adapting with new ways of staying connected and continuing with the ministries God has entrusted to us. Please, as you have ideas about how we can better fulfill our mission, share them with us. Yes, I believe that just as God used weak, flawed, doubting Gideon to accomplish his purposes some 3,000 years ago, God is continuing to use your church during this health crisis when we are weakened, in effect. We are flawed, as always. We are doubting at times. But also, like Gideon, ultimately we choose to put our trust in the God who has proven himself faithful over and over again. And we are choosing to do what he guides us to do. Now, of course, we are not asked to raise an army to fight Midianites like Gideon was, but we are in a battle. And God is nudging us as a church and as individuals to do little things to win that battle. Each of us has to do her or his part. It's mostly little things, mundane things that we know by heart by now, staying sequestered as possible to protect ourselves and others, washing our hands, yes. You know, my phone forgot my thumbprint. It got so dried that the fingerprint couldn't be read. I had to redo that. Washing our hands and sanitizing every potentially dangerous surface. You know, I came in today and I wiped down the pulpit before I started, and before I leave, I'll wipe it down again for Robin next week. You know, we got to do all those things. These are what our God is calling us to do, and we got to take the updates seriously and adapt as we go along. We all know the drill by now. And as these routines become second nature, we can develop other new routines to reach out to one another, to stay active and healthy in our self-isolation, and then maintain the ties that bind by telephone, text, email, FaceTime, Skype, and Zoom. and above all, through prayer. We got to be praying up a storm. It is not business as usual, folks. This is a war. And that means we need to redouble our efforts to stay spiritually nourished and to support in prayer our loved ones and the people and the programs, including mission partners, which God lays on our hearts. And I'm not embarrassed to ask you to pray for your church staff and your volunteer leaders, that we would stay healthy and that we would continue in compassionate and wise and effective action, guiding the congregational life of all disciples who call Lake Grove their church home. Together, let us transcend the notion of the unwilling hero from today's Bible story, and let's be by God's grace and guidance, let's be willing heroes as we see each other through the challenges and also the inevitable grief that this pandemic will unleash on us. But how can I do it, weak as I am? Gideon asked. How can I defeat an overwhelming enemy? And the Lord said to him, you will overcome this challenge because I will be with you. So don't be afraid. Instead, be at peace. I am Jehovah Shalom. Brothers and sisters of Lake Grove Church, let's do what we need to do, work the program, and let's be at peace. Yahweh, creator of the universe, is with us every step of the way. Amen.